King Arthur and His Knights by Elizabeth Lodor Merchant. The Dragon in the Sky. Sir, said Merlin, I know all your heart, every deal. So ye will be sworn unto me, as ye are a true king anointed, to fulfill my desire. Ye shall have your desire. Ye shall deliver the child to me, to nourish as I will have it, for it shall be to your worship, and the child's avail, as mickle as the child is worth. And remember, the King Arthur story kind of connects to stories of a particular ruler that ended up worshipped probably after his life. One dark night, while a storm was raging, Merlin stood at one of his 70 windows and looked and looked and looked up at the wild sky. He was expecting to see something there, something very unusual and wonderful, which one of his fairy books had told him to expect. For a long time, however, nothing happened. The watching magician saw only the clouds racing like inky shadows over the clear high spaces that were sprinkled with stars. Then, suddenly, he caught sight of a little pearly glimmer in the north. This little pearly glimmer grew brighter and brighter. It turned from silver to gold, and from gold to a deep shining red, like the red of rubies. Merlin gazed still more eagerly, and presently, in the heart of the red glow, he saw a great star brighten as you might see a crimson spark suddenly break into a shining flame. From the great star one ray shot out, suddenly, brilliantly, as a diamond and slender as a knight's spear. At the end of the ray appeared a globe of fire, which, as Merlin still watched, uncoiled itself slowly and took the shape of a beautiful but terrifying dragon. This fiery dragon opened its mouth and sent out 2 more rays, one to the east and the other to the west. The eastern ray seemed to have no end, but spread out into a great glow, so that you might almost have thought the sun was just about to rise. The ray to the west led into the night shadows, and then broke up into 7 smaller rays, which spread themselves in a golden fan above the shadowy peaks of the distant hills. And like the rolling hills, my stomach has been rumbling. When Merlin had seen all this happen, he laughed gladly, and flying down the long staircase of his fairy home, as lightly as a bird or butterfly, he set off on invisible wings through the night. Always the fiery dragon shone in the sky overhead, and Merlin knew that its bright form was hanging just over the castle at Uther, the castle of Uther the king. As the wizard drew nearer to the castle, wizard from Wiseman, he dropped his feet on the grass and took on the wizard wise, not necessarily male or female, I don't think. But we're talking about a male. As the wizard drew near the castle, he dropped to his feet on the grass and took on the form of an old man wrapped in a cloak, with his white beard blowing about him in the wind, and the hood of the cloak drawn over his eyes and forehead. Merlin walked up to the castle gates and knocked loudly with his staff. Now all this time the great flaming dragon was lying stretched out in the sky, bathing the towers and turrets of the castle in a crimson light, fiery and frightful. The guards and servants, the porters, the cooks, and the pages had seen it, and were very, very much frightened. Nobody dared to answer the door at first, so Merlin knocked again, much more loudly. Then, when a terrified porter appeared, the magician in a voice of authority demanded to be taken to the presence of the king. There was something in Merlin's voice that the porter dared not disobey. he hurriedly opened the great gate and let the old man in. Then he let Merlin through the courtyard, all aglow with the dragon's light, down the great stone corridor, across the hall, hung with gorgeous tapestry, where the trembling pages waited, dressed in satins and silks. There the porter paused and pointed, and Merlin went on alone, right into the royal apartment of the king. King Uther sat on his throne, pale and grave and quite alone. Through a great window, curtainless and arched, came the fiery glow from the dragon in the sky. Is Uther kind of descended from Ulster? It stained the fresh green rushes on the floor with crimson, and with crimson. Okay, I kept saying and shone all about the solitary figure of the king. Uther looked up at the sound of footsteps and saw an old man coming slowly up the room, wrapped in a long cloak, with a snow-white beard that streamed in long, thick strands far below his waist. "Who are you? Why do you come here, unbidden and unannounced?" demanded the king sternly. But before he finished speaking, the old man threw back his cloak, and Uther saw who he was. "Merlin, my friend Merlin," he cried in an altered voice, "I am indeed glad that you have come. What means this blazing and terrifying dragon in the sky? Is it a sign of some cruel disaster, some great trouble that is about to fall upon my house?" Then Merlin answered. His voice sounded so jealous and triumphant that King Uther knew the news was good even before the magician spoke. "The dragon is the most wonderful sign that has ever shone in the sky above the castle of a king," cried Merlin. "I have been watching for it night after night, hoping and longing to see it come. It means that to you and to the beautiful lady you love, a little prince will be born. This little prince will be the greatest king the world ever saw. He will reign over many subjects and will conquer all his enemies. He is the ray that goes from the mouth of the dragon to the east, and he will be as bright and beautiful as the rising sun. The ray that goes to the west and breaks up into 7 rays is your daughter. She will be not only a princess, but a fairy, and have 7 fairy children who will teach the men children of the west the songs that fairies sing. See how the 7 rays end in a shiny mist. That is the meaning of the fiery dragon, King Uther, the meaning that I have hurried into your presence to explain." So a lot more complex than your Star of Bethlehem story, but same basic idea. Uther listened breathlessly while the light from the dragon shone crimson upon the faces and hands and robes of the old wizard and the young king. Then Uther leaned forward and pressed his fingers on Merlin's arm. "My beautiful lady," he said eagerly, "do you mean Ygerne?" He could hardly wait for Merlin's reply, because he had loved Ygerne for many months, but she was shut up in a castle, quite out of his reach. "Yes, I mean Ygerne," answered Merlin. "I promise that you shall have her for your bride. I promise, too, that you and she shall have this bright and beautiful prince, and this fairy-like princess for your children. But if you are to marry Ygerne through my help, you must make me a promise in return." "What is that?" asked Uther. "Tell me. There's no promise that I would not make for the sake of beautiful Ygerne. You must promise that as soon as your little son is born, you will give him into my care. He has a great work to do in the world, and can learn to do it only if I have the care of him. Give me your promise, Uther, and I will set upon the performance of mine." Then King Uther for a moment felt uncertain and said, "Where would be the gladness in a little princely son if the child was to be taken away from him as soon as he was born?" But he loved Ygerne so passionately that, after hesitating for only 1 second, he consented. "Very well, Merlin," he cried, "very well. You shall have my little son to bring up as your own child, if you will only make it possible for me to marry my beautiful lady Ygerne." The red light shining through the window, that fell from the fiery dragon of the sky, grew stronger and fiercer as Uther spoke. When he had given the promise, the light blazed crimson and awful about the throne on which he sat, and glistened upon all the diamonds and sapphires in his scepter and crown. A peal of thunder rolled above the palace. A flash of lightning darted about the gray stone towers. A blazing dragon seemed to close its jaws. As it closed them, the rays drew slowly back into its great mouth, one ray from the east and the 7 rays from the west. It stretched out its long fiery claws, and the 2 great golden wings arose, waving over its great golden head. Then for an instant it spread out these wings and hung poised above the castle, so that all the pages and cooks and scullions and porters hid themselves in the darkest corners and cupboards and cellars they could find. But instead of swooping down upon the castle, as they expected, the blazing dragon struck its wings together once, twice, thrice, once, twice, thrice. The thunder pealed out again, and before its echoes had died away, the fiery creature had shot, swift as an arrow, far through the night sky, leaving behind it as a long tail of starry night, like the tail of a comet. Even King Uther had crouched for a moment and covered his face. When he took his jeweled satin cloak from his eyes, the royal throne room was empty, dark, and still. Merlin had vanished with the dragon and had gone back to the fairy house of 70 windows and 60 doors. The king was left alone, with the promise of a beautiful bride and a wonderful little son. The king stepped down from his throne and went to the window. He looked up to the sky and saw it dark and clear, silvered over with little quiet stars. Then he summoned a herald who came still trembling, and told him to take his trumpet and go through the castle, crying aloud these words: "King Uther has been told of the meaning of the blazing dragon in the sky. It is a sign of great gladness and victory and well-being for himself and for his kingdom. For now the king will be known as King Uther Pendragon, and he lays commands on his royal sculptors that the 2 golden dragons immediately be made. One of these dragons will be set up in the capital of his kingdom. The other will be carried by his royal standard-bearer into every battle. These are the orders of Uther Pendragon, king of the lordly and ancient country of Britain." And sometimes jinn make themselves known, knowing that idols and stuff will be made of them, that presumptions will be made.